I knew the second I saw that concrete truck backing into the trees behind my place that something bad was coming. Because rich people never stop once they start building, and the worst part is they always assume the rest of us are supposed to move out of the way for them. What I didn't know at the time was that 6 months later, that same million-dollar house would be sitting knee-deep in sewage while its owners stood in their driveway screaming at a judge over something they could have prevented with one simple survey. And honestly, if they hadn't treated me like I was some stubborn old hillbilly who didn't matter, I probably would have helped them. I've lived on my land outside of Bryan County, Tennessee since 1997. 9 acres, mostly woods, 1 gravel driveway, a little cedar cabin I built myself with my brother before he passed. It's not fancy, but every board in that place has a memory attached to it. I raised my daughter there, buried 2 dogs out near the creek, spent more nights sitting on that porch than I can count. Some people want gated communities and country clubs. Me, I wanted quiet. For over 20 years, that's exactly what I had. Then the developers came. At first it was chainsaws in the distance, then dump trucks, then survey crews walking around in bright neon vests like they'd discovered the moon. The company called the project Maple Crest Estates, which was funny because they bulldozed half the maple trees to build it. Big luxury homes started going up one after another. All these oversized gray and white houses with black trim and fake farmhouse lanterns out front. Every yard looked like a furniture catalog nobody actually lived in. Still, I kept to myself. I figured people could do whatever they wanted on their own land. Then the Whitakers showed up. Evan and Claire Whitaker. Mid-40s maybe. Both corporate attorneys from Atlanta. The kind of people who smiled without warmth. You know the type. Expensive sunglasses, spotless SUVs, voices that always sounded vaguely annoyed even when they were being polite. They bought the biggest lot in the development because it backed up against my property line, and apparently Claire had fallen in love with the untouched woodland view. That untouched woodland view was my backyard. The first time I met them was actually pleasant enough. Evan walked over while I was fixing my fence and introduced himself. Gave me one of those firm business handshakes that feels more like a negotiation than a greeting. Claire barely looked at me. She stood there holding one of those little designer coffee cups while staring at my cabin like it was a historical reenactment. She asked me, "So, do you hunt out here?" I said, "No, ma'am. Mostly just try to be left alone." Evan laughed at that like it was a joke. A couple weeks later, construction started. Now, I know my property lines. Out in the country, you learn real quick that fences matter less than paperwork. I'd had my land surveyed 3 different times over the years. Once when I bought it, once after a flood shifted a corner marker, and once when the developers first moved in because I already didn't trust where their crews were placing stakes. That decision ended up saving me. One morning I was walking the edge of my property with my dog Rusty when I noticed something that stopped me cold. The Whitakers Foundation crew had pushed straight past the orange survey flags near the back line. Not by inches either. I'm talking a good 12, maybe 15 feet onto my land. And not just anywhere. Right over my septic drain field. I remember standing there staring at it with this weird hollow feeling in my stomach. Because if you've never had a septic system installed, let me tell you something. The drain field is everything. You can't just move it overnight. County permits, soil inspections, environmental regulations. That whole setup had cost me nearly 18 grand back in the early 2000s. It was legally placed, fully documented, and had worked flawlessly for decades. Now there was a luxury sunroom foundation sitting directly on top of it. I walked over to the foreman, showed him my survey copy, tried being civil about it. The guy looked nervous immediately, like he already knew. He called somebody named Travis, apparently the site supervisor, and about 30 minutes later, this black Denali pulls onto the dirt road like the president's motorcade. Out steps Travis in brand new boots so clean they still had store creases in them. That should have told me everything. I handed him the survey. He barely glanced at it before saying, "Our engineers already cleared this boundary." I said, "Well, your engineers are standing on my septic system." He gave me this irritated little smile and said, "Sir, with all due respect, these luxury builds operate on strict timelines. You can't just stop a project because you think a line's off." Think. That word stuck with me. Because the second people with money decide your facts are just opinions, things get ugly fast. I went back inside that afternoon and dug every document I had out of my filing cabinet. Old county permits, septic diagrams, tax maps, survey reports, Even photos from when the system got installed back in 2001. I laid everything across my kitchen table and just sat there staring at it while Rusty slept at my feet. Because deep down I already knew this wasn't going to end with a polite apology and a corrected fence line. People like the Whitakers didn't make mistakes quietly. They buried them under money and paperwork until everyone else got exhausted. Still, I tried one last time to handle it neighbor to neighbor. I called Claire Whitaker directly. She answered on speakerphone, and I could hear dishes clinking in the background like she was halfway through brunch while I was standing there trying to keep somebody from destroying my property. I said, "Ma'am, your foundation crossed onto my land. I've got the surveys and permits to prove it. It's sitting on top of my septic field." Long pause. Then she goes, calm as can be, "Our developer survey team disagrees." Not maybe. Not let's look into it. Disagrees. I told her I wasn't looking for a fight. I just needed them to stop construction before the damage became permanent. And that's when her tone changed. You ever hear somebody talk to you like they've already decided your entire life is smaller than theirs? That was Claire. She said, "Mr. Talbot, we've invested nearly $1.3 million into this property. We're not halting construction over a disputed strip of dirt behind your cabin." Behind your cabin. Like my home was some lawn ornament. I said, "It's not disputed. It's legally mine." She let out this little laugh and said, "Then I suppose your attorney can discuss it with ours." Click. That was the moment it stopped being about land. It became about pride. The next few months were miserable. Every morning started with construction noise. Nail guns, diesel engines, backup alarms. Sounded like a war zone outside my woods. The further they built, the angrier I got because I could physically see the problem getting worse. Massive concrete supports pressed right into the area where my septic lines ran underground. Then they added this giant glass sunroom off the back of the house with stone pillars and heated floors, all built directly over the drain field. And the whole time, they acted like I was invisible. One afternoon, I walked down there again after workers left and found one of my property stakes ripped completely out of the ground and tossed into the woods. That one nearly sent me over the edge. I hired an attorney the next day. His name was Walter Green. Older guy out of Knoxville. Suspenders. Smoked little cigars that smelled like burnt maple syrup. Real quiet personality until somebody lied in front of him. Then he turned into a chainsaw. After reviewing my documents, he just leaned back in his chair and said, "Well, they're either stupid, arrogant, or betting you can't afford court." Turned out the answer was all three. We filed for an injunction immediately, but the Whitakers' legal team delayed everything. Continuances, procedural motions, survey disputes, every trick in the book. Months dragged by, while the house kept going up. By Christmas, they'd fully moved in, and that part really got under my skin. Because every night, I look through the trees and see them hosting dinner parties in that stupid sunroom sitting on top of my land. Warm yellow lights glowing through the glass. People drinking wine, laughing. Meanwhile, I was paying legal bills trying to stop them from literally crushing my infrastructure. One night, my daughter Lily came to visit and found me sitting on the porch, just staring at their house. She said, "Dad, you okay?" And I remember saying something that surprised even me. I said, "I think they honestly believe people like us are supposed to lose." Lily sat beside me quietly for a second, then said, "Then don't." Court finally came almost 8 months later. The Whitakers arrived looking like they were attending a country club fundraiser. Claire wore this cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than my truck. Evan kept smiling at everybody like he'd already won. Then the judge reviewed the surveys. All three of mine lined up perfectly. Theirs didn't. Turns out the developers had used outdated planning markers from before the county updated the parcel boundaries years earlier. In plain English, they built part of $1 million home on land they never owned. The courtroom got real quiet after that. Judge Holloway took his glasses off, looked directly at the Whitakers, and asked, "Did nobody independently verify these boundaries before construction?" Claire immediately blamed the developer. The developer blamed the survey contractor. The contractor blamed old county records. Classic rich people's circle of finger-pointing. Finally, the judge just held up a hand and said, "Enough." Then he issued the ruling. Clear as day. The encroachment had to be removed. Not compensated. Not negotiated. Removed. I swear you could feel the oxygen leave the room. Claire stood up so fast her chair slammed backward and said, "Your Honor, do you understand what demolition would cost us?" Judge Holloway looked completely unimpressed. He said, "Mrs. Whitaker, property law doesn't stop applying because the house is expensive. Even Walter tried not to smile at that one. Outside the courthouse, Evan caught me near the parking lot. Now, up until then, he'd always been polished and controlled, but that mask was cracking. He stepped close and said quietly, "You're really willing to destroy part of our home over a technicality?" And man, that word again. Technicality. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "You built a mansion on top of my septic system. That's not a technicality." For the first time since this whole thing started, it didn't have a comeback. But here's the thing nobody knew yet. The septic problems had already started. About 2 weeks after the court ruling, I noticed the grass near the drain field looked wrong. Darker, wet. There was this smell too. Faint at first, then stronger every day. If you've lived around septic systems long enough, you know that smell instantly. It hits the back of your throat before your brain even catches up. I called a county inspector. He ran cameras through the lines and stopped halfway through the inspection. I still remember him climbing out of the trench, shaking his head slowly. He said, "Buddy, this system's crushed." Turns out the weight from the Whitaker's foundation had collapsed multiple drainage pipes underground. Wastewater had nowhere to go anymore. Pressure was building beneath the soil directly under their precious glass sunroom. And once sewage starts surfacing, the county doesn't treat it like a neighbor dispute anymore. They treat it like a health hazard. Suddenly, everybody moved fast. Environmental inspectors showed up. County officials showed up. One guy from sanitation actually laughed under his breath when he realized where the drain field sat in relation to the Whitaker's addition. Then came the engineering report. To fully replace the septic system, excavation would have to happen directly underneath the sunroom foundation. There was no way around it. And according to structural engineers, removing that soil without demolishing the addition first could destabilize the entire rear section of the house. When the Whitakers heard that, panic finally hit them. Real panic. The kind money can't soften. Claire came to my property personally for the first time since all this began. No sunglasses this time. No attitude either, just fear. She stood there near my fence, twisting her hands together and said, "There has to be another option." And honestly, for about half a second, I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Claire stood there looking exhausted, like somebody had finally peeled away all the layers of money and confidence and left behind a regular, scared human being. The wind was blowing through the trees. Construction crews had gone quiet for once, and for a second the whole thing felt strangely sad instead of satisfying. She said, "We can compensate you for the repairs." I remember laughing a little at that, not because it was funny, but because after nearly a year of being treated like I was beneath them, suddenly now they wanted cooperation. I said, "This stopped being about compensation the moment you ignored me." She tried again. "We trusted the developer, and I trusted you to care when I warned you." That one landed hard. She looked away after that. A few days later, we were back in court for the emergency septic repair hearing. By then, the county had classified the property as an active environmental risk. Judge Holloway already looked irritated before proceedings even started, probably because he knew this entire mess never should have existed in the first place. The Whitakers had hired a structural engineer who testified that excavating beneath the sunroom could cause catastrophic settling along the rear foundation wall. Real dramatic wording too. Catastrophic. Structural compromise. Risk to occupants. Then the county inspector testified right after him and basically said, "Yeah, and raw sewage bubbling into the groundwater is also bad." That courtroom got awkward real fast. Finally, Judge Holloway leaned back in his chair and asked the obvious question. "So the addition must be removed before repairs can begin?" The engineer nodded. Claire actually started crying right there. Not loud sobbing or anything. Just that silent, defeated kind of crying where somebody realizes consequences finally caught up to them. Evan looked furious, but not at me anymore. Honestly, he looked furious at himself. Then came the ruling. 30 days to remove the sunroom. No delays. No further appeals. Repairs authorized immediately after demolition. That was it. 1 year of arrogance ended in less than 30 seconds. The demolition started on a Tuesday morning. I made coffee, sat on my porch, and watched the whole thing through the trees. And listen, I know some people are going to hear this story and think I enjoyed it too much. Maybe they're right. Maybe after everything that happened, seeing that pristine glass showroom get torn apart piece by piece felt a little too satisfying. But you gotta understand something. For months, those people treated me like I was insignificant. Like because my house was smaller and my clothes were older and my land wasn't part of some gated development, my rights somehow mattered less than their investment portfolio. That'll harden a person. The crew started by removing the windows. Giant tinted panels stacked carefully onto trailers while workers disconnected lighting fixtures and heated flooring systems. The whole addition looked hollow once they stripped the glass away, like a movie set somebody forgot to finish. Then the excavators moved in. Steel teeth through cedar beams. Stone columns cracking apart. Dust everywhere. At one point, I saw Evan standing in the driveway yelling at the contractor while Claire sat inside their SUV staring straight ahead like she'd emotionally left the planet. And the craziest part? If they had listened to me on day one, fixing the problem probably would have cost them maybe 30 grand. Instead, the final number ended up somewhere north of 400,000 by the time everything was over. Demolition costs, legal fees, septic reconstruction, environmental penalties, engineering inspections, landscaping repairs, temporary relocation expenses while part of the house was stabilized, all because they couldn't admit they were raw. My new septic system took about 3 weeks to install. Bigger tank, updated lines, better filtration setup. Honestly, it was nicer than the original one. County inspectors signed off on everything, and eventually the grass grew back over the trenches like nothing had happened. But the neighborhood changed after that. Word spread fast through Maple Ridge Estates. Suddenly, the Whitakers weren't the power couple everybody admired anymore. They became the cautionary tale. People whispered when they drove by. Contractors joked about checking the septic before pouring concrete. Even the developers quietly stopped using those flashy marketing brochures showing the Whitakers' house as the centerpiece model. A few months later, I ran into Evan one last time at the local hardware store. Didn't even recognize him at first. Guy looked 10 years older. No expensive jacket, no polished confidence. Just tired. We stood there awkwardly near the plumbing aisle for a second before he finally said, "You know, I really did think you were bluffing." I nodded and said, "Most people do when they think money solves everything." And here's the part that still sticks with me. He didn't argue, didn't get defensive, didn't threaten lawsuits. He just kind of stared at the floor and quietly said, "Claire wants to move." I honestly didn't know what to say to that, because by then I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had burned itself out somewhere between the court hearings and the excavators tearing through that sunroom. What was left after that wasn't revenge exactly. It was something simpler. Boundaries. That's really what this whole story was about from the beginning. Not property lines, not septic systems. Boundaries. The moment people convince themselves your space, your peace, your rights, or your voice matter less than their ambition, eventually something collapses. Sometimes it's a relationship. Sometimes it's a community, and sometimes it's a $400,000 sunroom sitting on top of a broken septic field. So now I'm curious what you guys think. If you were in my position, would you have pushed the case all the way through? Or would you have taken the money and let it go? And do you think the Whitakers got what they deserved? Or did things go too far once demolition started? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because stories like this always split people right down the middle. And if you enjoyed this one, hit like and subscribe for more real-world neighbor disputes, property battles, and those rare moments when karma shows up wearing steel-toe boots.